Hey everyone, welcome back. Last time we were taking a look at the beginning of the Northern Renaissance with Northern humanism and how these ideas led to the Reformation. Today we're going to take a look at the Northern Renaissance, how these ideas are influencing art, and just some background information on the Northern Renaissance, just to kind of focus on where these ideas really begin. They begin in Belgium, in Bruges. It was one of the wealthiest cities in Europe next to Florence. It was one of the headquarters of the Medici banking, and it was the port to the north. It gave access to trade, and we see, very similar to what we see in Florence, as the rising merchant class. Most of the patrons of northern art will be the wealthy middle class merchants rather than religious institutions that we see in the South. And so that's going to greatly impact the art that we're going to see in Northern Renaissance. And just a map of Belgium here. We're going to take a look at, mainly the center is going to be here with Bruges and Philip the Good, who is very similar to the Medici family in Belgium in the north. But we'll also take a look at Gant. Gant's another city that's going to be a major player within one particular work of art of the Northern Renaissance. And so we'll take a look at those two main elements when we're just for today. Just to give you some kind of contextual information, Michelangelo stated that Flemish painters painted with such exactness and precise detail that they were far better, right, within their exactness than the Italians. But he does criticize the Flemish painters because he says they do have a good attempt at many things, but because they do this, they do nothing well. And so what he argues is that they're going to try to do too much in their art, and this causes them to lose the simplicity, which is what the Italians were going for. That's how they defined beauty, with simplicity and balance and harmony. Now, that's Michelangelo's criticism. You can agree with it or you can disagree with it, but I just wanted to kind of throw that out there to start thinking about some of the similarities and differences as we juxtapose the Italian versus the Northern Renaissance. I want to just kind of outline some of the main points that I see as a differences between the Italian and Northern Renaissance. One of them is that of realism. Similar to the Italian Renaissance, in most cases there is an emphasis on trying to create realistic looking objects. It's going to be naturalist in that it's going to resemble nature, right? So that was a big driving force of the Italian Renaissance to see God as the master creator and the creator of beauty. And so if we were to emulate his beauty, we have to then mirror the natural world. And we're going to see a similar effect of that in the Northern Renaissance. There's going to be an emphasis on linear perspective, the illusion of depth. They're going to use Brunelleschi's linear design with the horizontal line, the orthogonal lines that are going to push towards a vanishing point. But there are going to be differences within their elements of realism, right? Realism in the North is not going to be the primary objective for the artists. Italian Renaissance saw God as the master, and that was their driving force, right? The master artist. In the North, they have a different objective. They tend to be more symbolic, and their works convey more of a symbolic message rather than emphasizing a real kind of element to it. The Northern art and Italian art likes details, but the Northern art seeks to convey everything in a work down to the most minute detail, right? There's some people that argue that Jan van Eyck paints with both a microscope and a telescope, right? Meaning that you can get right into the very nitty-gritty details and see the finest points. And I'll show you some of these as we go through today. But also he's painting with a telescope, and so you can see way off into the distance. And we don't necessarily see that in the Italian Renaissance. That wasn't necessarily their focus. They just wanted to give you a sense of the foreground. The background wasn't as important in Italy. Another major element within this is emotion. Similarly, the artists do convey emotion to try to get the viewer to feel something, right? Some type of emotion. But the difference is, in Italian art, the emotion is refined and controlled, as we see with the Pietà, with Jesus smiling or Mary's quiet, somber reflection. Where in the North, the emotion is much more exaggerated and dynamic, and so we're going to see that. So that's another thing to pay attention to. The role of the artist is going to be very similar. There's going to be a movement to raise the status of the artist. That we see, the artist is going to be more than just a craftsman, a skill at someone that has some type of trade skill. It's going to be someone that has some type of deep, profound insights that can lift us spiritually. The colors are going to be quite different. The Italian Renaissance uses a very limited color palette. Mainly, they use pastels, and for this, you can think of the Sistine Chapel, right? Using very kind of muted or kind of soft colors. The Northern Renaissance seeks to overwhelm you with a variety of intricate colors, and one of the main reasons for this is one of the main artists of the Italian Renaissance, Jan van Eyck, is discovering oils, and oils is going to revolutionize the art world, and so he's trying to use more colors, more vibrant colors, to overwhelm and to create that spirituality. The background, we talked a little bit about the role of the background. Italian art seeks to shorten the background. Northern art seeks to expand it almost endlessly. The unity is going to be quite different. Italian art seeks to have everything fit within a unified whole. The Northern art, again, that's not going to be their focus. And so this is where they're going to start to differ from the natural way or the realism. They're going to show us things that just don't necessarily fit together because it's more symbolic than it is realistic. And so some objects will be obscure or odd in the context of the entire painting. I'll show you a couple of examples of that. And then this idea of secularism versus symbolism. There's a movement to secularize Northern art. And this is going to be very different from the Italian embrace of pagan ideas. We don't necessarily see pagan themes of Dionysus or Bacchus in the Northern art. They're not going to go in that direction. But once the Reformation hits, you're going to see a vast change in how they're representing religious images. And I'll show you that transformation. So that's also something to pay attention for. So their art is going to try to focus more on ordinary events rather than overtly spiritual events. And one of the reasons for this is the emphasis. What Martin Luther argued is that art is becoming a false god. In that people actually go to something like this. This is the Gans altarpiece. We've talked about this in our Zoom discussion. It's closed. I'll talk a little bit more about this. I just wanted to show you an altarpiece. But what we see within this is people would actually go to a church and they would pray to the altarpiece as though the altarpiece had some type of magical kind of power to it. So this would be at the center of a church at the altar, and then people would go and pray to it. Well, Martin Luther believed, right, influenced by mysticism, is that we don't necessarily need all that. All you need is someone that has faith and is devout and prays to God. And so what we see in the North is they start removing these kind of overly religious images. Martin Luther believed that you didn't need saints, and so we're going to see the saints become kind of pushed to the side. Martin Luther believed that we need to, not necessarily pray to Mother Mary. We just need to have that direct one-on-one relationship with Christ and God. And so what we're going to see in the North is they're going to remove all of these kind of overly Catholic images from their art. And so Jan van Eyck is painting in the 15th century. This is pre-Reformation, so we're going to see these ideas. But what I'm going to show you today is how these ideas start to change. And so it's kind of interesting. What we see in the Italian Renaissance is they embrace more secular ideas early on with their use of ancient Greek and Roman ideas and myths that they begin to resurrect within the Renaissance. But after the Renaissance, due to the Counter-Reformation, they embrace religious works more, right? In the North, it's almost the exact opposite, right? Minus the pagan images. In the North, they embrace more religious images early in the Renaissance. But then, as a result of the Reformation, they move away and start emphasizing secular themes with the rise of Protestantism in the North. Let's take a look at Jan van Eyck. He earned his fame for painting with exact ocular detail. Now I'll show you some of that. Right, he was the artist of a very wealthy nobleman of France known as Philip the Good. who was, as I mentioned, like the Medicis. Philip sent him on missions throughout Europe to parts of Spain and Portugal, and on his way back, he was passing through Italy, and he brings back the flair of the Italian Renaissance. And so again, we see this transition, this movement of ideas from Italy to the north. Some of the criticisms, though, is that he didn't always adhere to antique subject matters as the Italian humanists did, right? He stuck with mainly Christian themes throughout his life in one way, shape, or another. However, sometimes he does paint secular images. I'll talk about that, but they still have those religious, overt religious messages to them. And it's, as I mentioned, it says that he paints with a microscope and a telescope. And I'll kind of show you this. This is the Ghent altarpiece, and you can see that it's closed. Here's the hinge. What I showed you is when they take this hinge and they open it, and you can see, God the Father kind of peeking through with his eye here. They open this one, and so this is it closed together. This is the Annunciation, Gabriel and Mary, right, and then the dove, right, announcing that she's going to be the mother of Mary. And then these are the patrons, the people paying for the art here. This is in Ghent in Belgium. This is Hodicus Vid and Isabel Barlout at the very side. And so they get, because they're paying for this, they get to be part of this kind of religious sacred experience. And then you have John the Baptist shown with a lamb. Generally, that's one of his iconography. And then John the Evangelist. And these are just paintings of sculptures, right? And these sculptures are kind of like classical images. And so you can see the Italian kind of influence of these ancient Greek and Roman ideas being brought back to the north. And so we can see that is bringing back these ideas with them. Let's take a look at it open. I just wanted to, mainly I want to focus on the panel open. So you can see here the hinges, and each one of these is a wood panel that swings open. And we've talked a little bit about this in our Zoom session. But we can learn a lot from the ideas that Van Eyck establishes with the altarpiece here. Again, what we've seen before, we've talked about some of these elements before with Adam and Eve on the outside, and then the heavenly choir of angels who are kind of singing, and then we kind of get closer and closer to the divine. We have Mary, who's kind of lost in her scripture study, and then John the Baptist pointing towards God. When you have God the Father being kind of blessing, reaching out, kind of blessing towards humanity. Then down here is the Crusaders, all coming towards the very center, the adoration of the Lamb. Here on an altar, symbolic again of Christ. And again, well, as I mentioned, that the Northern Renaissance focuses more on symbolism than in Italy. And so here we see, rather than painting Christ, we see a symbol of that. And then the dove, the Holy Ghost here, and then a group of pilgrims going on a pilgrimage all kind of collectively. So this is supposed to be the world all kind of moving towards the center of Christ. And then this is more of the divine space here. I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about the importance of this before I show you some of the details and some of the significance. This was actually stolen during the 1930s by the Germans. The Germans came in as they were conquering various areas throughout all of Europe. They came in and they took this one as part of their conquest. And it took some brave individuals going out there and to find the art. And so art was a big part of Germany. They wanted to control the most amount of art of Europe to try to preserve the traditions of Europe. And so The Monuments Men, which was a film with George Clooney and Matt Damon, was representative or demonstrated this particular, centered on this particular art piece.
As a representative and proud citizen of this great city, I would like to share this message with all of you. We all know that Ghent is, and always will be, the home of the Ghent altarpiece, the famous Van Eyck brothers painting that was conceived in 1432. The movie that you are about to see focuses on a very important moment in the existence of the Ghent altarpiece. If it weren't for the Monuments Men, special forces that tracked and rescued many works of art that were stolen by Nazi thieves, our altarpiece would still be missing. Thanks to the bravery of the Monuments men, it returned to the place where it was conceived. Its home, St. Bavo's Cathedral. All except for one panel, The Just Judges, which was stolen in 1934 and never retrieved. Even today, no one knows where to look for it. Is it lost forever? Who's to say? The adoration of the mystic lamb will always be one of Ghent's treasures. Everyone should have seen this extraordinary masterpiece at least once in his lifetime. Do come to Ghent and experience this magnificent piece of art and our city with your own eyes.
So what's kind of interesting to me about this is it brings, the Renaissance into more of a contemporary theme of art being stolen and abducted. And the question is art worthy enough for people to risk their lives for it, right? Should we just kind of let it go and just say, you know what, it's not worth people going off there and to their perhaps demise? Or is there something about it that makes it important and vital and worth sacrificing for? Is there something about the culture, something about our identity, our past that we want to connect with? Taking a look at some of the images, I just want to go through some of the details of this to show you how Jan van Eyck is painting with both a telescope and a microscope in detail. If you take a look, for instance, at Adam and Eve here, you can see, very similar to what we see with Michelangelo, the emphasis on the anatomy, right? Trying to create something that looks as though there is life there, right? So he's depicting the flesh and the different colorations of the flesh, as we see here with the hand and the chest, right? We see that there's a different color pattern, as though the sun has touched different parts of the skin a little bit differently. And as you see the close-up on the hand of the veins, it seems as though there is blood coursing through that to give it that sense of life. And you see the eyes. If you take a look at the eyes of Adam, you can see that there is light coming in. And this is actually painted as though it's in the space of the church, right? The actual location. I'll show you another clip that talks more about that. But as we see here with Eve, you can see again the emphasis on the detail of the face, but also the cheeks, right? To focus on the different textures, the different colors that come with skin. And here she holds the fruit, the tree of knowledge, in her hand that gives her that has separated them from God. And so we see a different emphasis. I want to talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. Here's just a detail of the heavenly angel choir. I always kind of laugh at the faces that they're making, but take a look at the gems, right? The gems all kind of have this light, this translucence to it that he's painting with such exactness. And we see again similar detail on the crown of God. And not only is there this halo that's surrounding him, this light that just radiates from him, but we see the light shining through these gems. And we talked a little bit about the staff here that he has, the scepter that is crystal, and you can see the light shining through it. It gives it this translucent quality, or the pearls, right? Each of these pearls is painted with such exactness that you see the lighting source that's coming from, it's as though it's coming from this upper window of the cathedral, kind of shining through and reflecting on this, each minute detail. We don't see this kind of detail in Italy. We don't see this kind of precision in Italy. We see generally larger brushstrokes of kind of the overall image, and we do see that emphasis of realism, but not quite to this level, right? So something to kind of consider. How do we contextualize this between the North and the South, and some of the ideas? What we see here, first of all, is the different role that God plays in these works that represent how each culture saw God and their relationship to God, right? Michelangelo depicts God as the artist. Jan van Eyck depicts God as the king, right? And so a different kind of feel, right? If you see an artist, right? An artist in the Renaissance has this kind of insights, this passion, this kind of emotional quality to it, working with his hands. A king is someone that's above and elevated and has this kind of just majesty that exudes from him, right? Both of them are, accurate, I think, representations of godhood, right? And I think it was Elder Uchtdorf that says that that's the paradox of humanity, that in comparison to God, we are nothing. I think that's what Jan van Eyck is representing here. But on the other hand, as Elder Uchtdorf argues, he says, but we are everything to him. And I think that's what Michelangelo is representing, is a God reaching out and guiding and directing. And so both of them have truth within them. They just have different moments that they're emphasizing. And so in the Italian Renaissance, God reaches towards man, extending himself to help us. We see that humans are focused more on free will, our ability to reach towards the divine. In the North, we see that humanity is separate from God due to the folly, as we mentioned with Erasmus, due to the fall that we have chosen through our free will to separate ourselves from God. And then we also see kind of this divine element that with what we see with Mary and John the Baptist, they sit to God's side. They're too like this royalty, right? We see Mary with her royal blue. Blue is a very expensive color during that time, and so you didn't see a lot of blue within art because it was so expensive. So generally it was reserved for Mary. That was just a way for them showing this reverence towards her. So generally she's always surrounded in some type of blue to demonstrate her royalty. So they're kind of set aside from humanity, but they seem disconnected in their own separate spheres and their own kind of concerns. Another difference that we see is the emphasis on death, right? Man is not necessarily as robust and beefy, for lack of a better word, that we see with Michelangelo's. There's kind of a different emphasis on what is, we have the focus on mortality rather than this eternal element. We have a focus on this kind of more temporal emphasis of humanity. So this is emphasizing the moment of the fall, right? So again, another argument to think about the differences between them is the moment of the fall rather in the North rather than the moment of creation, which gives it a different argument. It gives it a different feel, and just kind of this different separateness between how do we represent mortality versus how do we represent the divine. And I think that he's trying to struggle with how do we represent the divine. We'd represent the divine as something that's better than humanity. What's better than humans? Royalty, right? And so he's trying to represent that in that sense. But if you take a look at the detail here, the fingernails, we can kind of sense that the fingernails have their own kind of depth to them, and then the kind of the wrinkles in the hand as he holds his hand up, just the amount of detail that he shows. I want to show you one more clip that talks about the importance of the Ghent altarpiece in connection with its current location, or its location of where it was meant to be exhibited.
St. Bavo's Cathedral in Ghent still holds the painting, a great altarpiece, that started that revolution. The Ghent altarpiece has overwhelmed viewers since it stood complete in 1432. People of the time pronounced it the most beautiful work in Christendom, and its chief creator, Jan van Eyck, was deemed the Prince of Painters. Today it remains arguably the finest single painting in the world, and of all its many wonders, the one most singled out for praise is the figure of Adam. To early observers, this painted Adam looked like a living being. Paint captures the minute subtleties of flesh, Blood seems to pulse beneath flesh, and the skin of Adam's hands and face is visibly tanned by the sun. One detail intensifies this semblance of animation. Adam raises his big toe so that you can see its underside. The toe seems even to stick out of the stone niche where the figure stands, allowing Adam to appear to step into our world. Remember, this is Adam. Adam who sinned, who therefore died, and who as the ongoing consequence of his sin made us all mortal. In the painting, Adam lives again. Resurrected, he strides towards the paradise he lost. The altarpiece was designed and painted for this chapel. Every painted object in the altarpiece is shown reacting to light as if it's a real object here in space. And you can see this immediately in the closed form of the altar, in which all the statues and the two donors, the fights, are all lit exactly from that part of the chapel where the sun streams in and would, if these were real statues, cast shadows and highlights in the way they do in Van Eyck's picture. The closed state is complex. The open state is even more complex. Again, everything in the picture reacts to the light and the space exactly as real figures would in such a situation. But here, because of the nature of the subject, and because he's added this stupendous element of color, because he's multiplied the detail, the level of relations between the world out here and the world of the picture becomes almost infinite. Every one of the jewels, every part of the complex tapestry of this picture is carefully programmed to react to the light that's in this room. So, for example, the figure of Adam, who comes from the left, has highlights in his eye, whereas the figure of Eve, who is shaded in this real space, has no highlights in her eye. There are even certain jewels, ones on the angels on the left, which reflect the actual shape and position of the window which lights them. Today, the actual painting has been removed from this setting. Van Eyck's map.
So, as we see, we take a look at the importance of the Gant altarpiece. Unfortunately, Belgium is a country in Europe that has eluded me, but one day I hope to be able to go to the city of Gant and be able to see it. But just returning to Michelangelo's statement, right, about Northern Renaissance artists, they do have a good attempt at many things, but because of this, they do nothing well. I want you to think about if that's necessarily a fair or accurate criticism. Is that something that you agree with, right? Or do you suggest that maybe as we take a look at the context and how Jan van Eyck is representing that actual space and representing the realism and the detail that goes into his work of art and that effort, does he become that prince of painting, as was mentioned in the video? And could this be considered the finest painting in the world? And so just something to kind of to think about, right? So again, some of the similarities and differences between them, right? The differences between them is this idea of simplicity in Italy versus the complexity in the North. And then realism is not necessarily the primary focus in the North. And we see that with the Adoration of the Lamb. But again, the similarities is a focus on anatomy, a focus on linear perspective, right? Some of the differences, similarities and differences within this, something to think about within this. Italian art generally shortens the background, as we see with Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam, where what we see with the North is we're going to see greater emphasis on detail of the background. But again, what we're also going to see, another difference is going to be focusing on the Italian Renaissance, is there's going to be more pagan themes, and in the north we're going to see more ordinary life. Let's take a look at a couple more images of Jan van Eyck. This one is Madonna and Chancellor Roland. Chancellor Roland was just a very wealthy individual, patron of the arts. But what we see here, a couple emphasis is, number one is the symbolic reference of the angel here, which we would never really see painted in this kind of detail in Italy. What we would generally see, like we see with the image of God, he's kind of surrounded by angels, but much more realistic, right? This one kind of has a different kind of size to it, almost as though it's like 1/4 size of reality, kind of holding this crown, this halo above Mary's head. And here she sits. We kind of seen this theme before, her sitting down with baby Jesus on her lap, and then Christ is holding this crucifix here, and then blessing Chancellor Roland. And a couple things to kind of think about. We see an emphasis of mysticism here, that anyone can have a spiritual experience. It's not just for religious clergy, right? And so here, a secular leader is having a religious experience by seeing Madonna and Child. Here he is shown in contemporary clothes, contemporary of the 15th century clothes, and Mary looks majestic with her eyes kind of cast down in this kind of somber, quiet reflection, while the angel places the crown above her head to show her royalty, her majesty. And then we see a little bit of political undertones to this, right? Some of the currents of politics, right? Roland can then use this image to show that he has the divine right to rule, right? Failure to obey him means a failure to obey God. And so here we see the blending of contemporary themes with more kind of religious and secular themes. And this is going to be an ongoing trend in Northern Renaissance art. But just take a look at the minute detail, right, that we see, right? Rather than foreshortening the background as we would see in Italy, he expands that background into this kind of never-ending, almost eternal kind of landscape. And here we see I love this kind of this beautiful detail here of these two little children out just kind of playing, one wandering around, wondering what's happening, and then the peacocks here just kind of going on about their day, all oblivious of what's going on inside this building, right? The spiritual experience. And so life, we just see this 15th century life that just kind of goes on with unaware of the spiritual experience. And here you see the bridge and the people walking across the bridge, and just this river that just kind of lazily goes on into the mountains. So again, painting with a microscope and a telescope is a part of his style. Let's take a look at his Arnolfini portrait. Here we see again that blending of religious and secular ideas, and this is going to be that trend. This is a secular image of just a wealthy patron, Arnolfini, and his bride here. Many believe this to be a wedding portrait, but some claim that's more of an engagement portrait. We're not sure exactly why Arnolfini commissioned this, if it was to celebrate his wedding, if it was some type of wedding gift to his wife, or if it was something to commemorate the engagement. I'm not really sure. We don't really know. But there's a lot of religious overtones. There's a lot of symbolism within here. Just to show you again some of the detail, right? The back wall here, we see a mirror. And so we see it being reflected. We see the back of Arnolfini and then his wife here. And then this figure here, which could be Jan van Eyck, the painter, or it could be the clergy that's marrying them. We don't necessarily know, although that would be a little bit unusual because this isn't taking place in the church. It's taking place in an apartment. But again, we see that the light source coming in, and it reflects on everything, right? It reflects on the chandelier, reflects on the rosary beads and the brush here. And then on the very back of the wall, we see the signature. Jan van Eyck was here, right? And then he gives it the date 1434. And so again, what we see within that signature is the rise, the importance of the artist coming in. And this is just a couple other details of that mirror, just to give you a sense. And then just to give you a sense, this is me standing in front of it. This is currently in the National Gallery in London. You get a sense of the size, right? So this, to me, what amazed me is that as much detail as this particular work of art has, it's not very big, right? So he has to use a very fine brush to be able to get in there and do the amount of detail that he does. But taking a look at some of the symbolism that we see, which is going to be important in the north, we see that there's a lot of religious symbolism here. You see the one lit candle on the chandelier, which is symbolic of the light of Christ that's entering into the room to bless this union. Here we see the emphasis that we're going to see with Calvinist ideas, the emphasis on brushwork, cleanliness, industry, thrift. That's all going to be picked up in Switzerland and carried on in the north. Although this is a little bit early for that, but we still see those themes, those ideas that are beginning to kind of manifest within the north. A lot of people ask about the dog, right? Why is the dog there? The dog generally represents fidelity, loyalty, which would be important within this particular union, right? But this is going to be the trend after Martin Luther, right? Religious iconography will be removed, right? Saints and Mary are going to be removed from their images because they're seen as graven images. So most of the art will be about daily life and the symbolism of how to transcend daily life into more of a spiritual type of setting. Let's take a look at a couple more Northern Renaissance artists, just to give you a sense of some of the other themes that are important. Let's take a look at Matthias Grunewald, who is a German painter, and mainly he was familiar with Renaissance art, and but we see different ideas from Italy emerging within his particular works. The Isenheim altarpiece, very similar to the Gant altarpiece. Isenheim was an area in Germany that was a hospital for plague victims, the bubonic plague victims, and so they put this in the church there in order for people who are experiencing problems with the plague to be able to then go and to pray to this, to be able to have relief from this. And a couple of images in here help to demonstrate that. One is on the outside panels. You see Saint Sebastian, who is the patron saint that protects against plagues, which is extremely important during that time, as Germany was kind of getting hit by the bubonic plague kind of later than Italy. It hits Italy in the 1300s, but it takes a little bit longer to hit Germany, and it comes in several waves. And then over here on the far right-hand side, we see St. Anthony, who is the protector against diseases, which is going to be important for the plague, which feels pretty relevant and contemporary in 2020 with the current pandemic that we're experiencing. And then we see at the very bottom, this is what's known as the deposition of Christ, when they take his body off the cross and they're going to put him in a tomb. And so here we see Mary kind of lamenting, and I think this is John, the beloved, who is holding him close as he's kind of preparing him for entombment. And then we see at the very center, we see Christ on the crucifix. This is John the Baptist, who we talked about before, is always pointing towards Christ and generally represented by a lamb who's carrying this crucifix, and then has the cup of Christ, right, the sacrament that's down here on the far bottom. Then we have Mary Magdalene, who's kind of praying, looking towards Christ as he dies. And then Mary being held by John the Beloved as she's just kind of swooning and overcome with her emotions. But taking a look at the detail, right, we see a different image that's emerging here than what we see in Italy, right? Taking similar ideas that's happening, we see the Italian Renaissance ideas moving north, but they're taking them differently, applying them to their own culture and what they value. Here we see the welts on the body, focusing on the brutality, the passion, as they say, of the Christ, which the immense suffering. But this was particularly important in Isenheim because, as I mentioned, this was a place that was hit by the plague, and it was served as a hospital. So this was the welts on them was something that people identified with as they were suffering from the plague. Here we see the tired eyes, they kind of darkened, the bags on the eyes of Christ. I've talked a little bit about this, the parched lips, that they've been discolored because of the extreme thirst, the extremely large thorns that are piercing into his sides, and they've pierced into his body as well. We see the spear wound in his side and the blood kind of spurting out. But again, a different type of emotion as well, right? The extreme pain of sorrow of Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Christ, and the immense amount of suffering, emotional toll that this is causing them to be overwhelmed. And then we see the extreme large spike that's going all the way through the wood, and then the hands are just kind of, the kind of crumpling in agony. A very different representation that we wouldn't really see in Italy, right? So as you think about this, I want you to think about what you notice of the differences between the Italian and Northern Renaissance, right? So I'm trying to get you to get a sense of how Italy is influencing the world, but also how each area, each region is taking these ideas and applying them differently according to whatever their contemporary issues are. And that's really what art does, right? Art reflects the culture in which it was created. How might these differences provide a different sight or understanding, or insight, I should say, about the view of humanity, right? So what can we learn about how the Italians understand humanity and our relationship to God, and how we start to see that in the North, right? Or as we see with Michelangelo and this Michelangelo's Christ here after the crucifixion, right, with the Pietà. How is that different from what Grunwald is emphasizing with the Isenheim altarpiece? And again, just nice little details here. The ghastly color of green and gray on the feet. I don't think the skin would change that quickly. But again, it's just focusing on this kind of unnatural feel, and then the blood kind of dripping down at the bottom. And so a different kind of element, right? The rise of Northern humanism, we see a different particular view of the human condition, and how the human condition is, what we need to do is we need to transcend that physical, mortal self in order to become better. And that's all on us, right? We don't necessarily need all the adornments and clothing and bishops and priests to do that. This is all on us, and so we need to be able to appreciate the sacrifice, and so that we can transcend beyond it, right? But again, the emphasis is not necessarily on realism, but it's on symbolism. If you take a look at the emphasis of Christ, right, in connection with all the other figures, he takes up he's about 2/3 larger than everyone else. And so this is, again, symbolic. It's not necessarily a realistic representation, but it's more of his symbolic importance, role of the crucifixion within Christianity. And again, John the Baptist, by the time Christ was crucified, was already beheaded. And so he wouldn't have been there watching Christ die, right? He's just symbolic to point towards Christ. And again, the symbolic lamb and the cup of Christ, they weren't actually there on the scene. This is more symbolic. And so again, sacrificing some realism in order to focus on symbolism. We don't necessarily see that in Italy, but we do see it more in the North. Let's take a look at Albrecht Dürer. We see some interesting images. I would compare Albrecht Dürer to be the Michelangelo of the North. Some people would say that Jan van Eyck is the Michelangelo of the North. I would say maybe Albrecht Dürer is. That's probably a little bit different. I'll kind of have that discussion a little bit later. But Albrecht Dürer visited Italy twice, once in 1494 and again in 1505, and his patron paid for him to be able to go there and to see his art. And so immediately, I was kind of interesting, immediately after he got married, he got married to his the main patron's daughter, and the two of them had like 18 kids together. So that in and of itself is a story. But then he goes down to Italy, influenced by the Italian Renaissance and the Italian Renaissance ideas, and he brings them back with him. Here we see his self-portrait. We see an emphasis on this realism, right? We can see the immense focus on each detail in the eyes. We see the light coming in from the left, and how that casts a shadow on the right-hand side of the image. It'd be his left, but on the right-hand side of the image. And then each curl delicately painted, very similar to what we see with Michelangelo, the emphasis on detail. And then the fur coat that he's wearing in the North, it's a little bit different because it's colder, and so generally we see a lot more clothing being added to their art because of the climate differences than in Italy, which is much warmer. We tend to see a little bit more flesh. Another one of the differences, just as a side note. But here we see his signature, AD. Anytime you see an AD like that, that's Albrechter, that's his signature, and then 1500. And then we see again his signature over here. But it's kind of interesting. We kind of have to wonder about what is the argument of this particular work. But here we see a radical shift, right? And it doesn't necessarily look like a radical image at first, but its ideas are quite profound, right? That the fact that this is a self-portrait and he portrays himself to look like Christ is quite interesting, right? It would be blasphemous for an artist to elevate himself or herself to be like Christ. But here, right, very similar to the mystics, we see that what's important is us and our relationship to Christ. And so what he argues is, who better to look like, who better to emulate? And here at the very kind of bottom of the image, we see him pointing to himself that it is about my relationship with God that is important. It's not about my relationship to the priest or my ability to pay for indulgences. It is me, and as a central importance, I can pray to God on my own. And so we see that the importance of humanism and mysticism starting to influence art and how they see the world. But we also see the elevation of the artist, right? As he signs his own work, we see very similar to what we see with Michelangelo's Pieta, where he signs it, suggesting that this is my work. I have the insights. I have the immense kind of profound kind of thoughts for us to elevate ourselves towards God. But again, even though this is a secular image, this isn't representing any saint or Mary. It's just representing himself. It still has the religious undertones. It's getting us to think about our relationship, our individual relationship with God. And so this is, again, leading towards what's happening within the North. Martin Luther comes about in 1517, just 17 years later after this. But we can already see that movement away from overly religious Catholic images within their art, which is going to become the standard. And let's take a look at Peter Bruegel. He's really going to be the first artist that we've studied for this class that happens after the Reformation, right? Reformation 1517, 1563, he comes around and paints the Tower of Babel. And he traveled to Italy in 1551 and 1552, and he completes a number of paintings and landscapes there, kind of influenced by the Italian Renaissance. And he returns home in 1553 and settles in Antwerp, and then he permanently then moves to Brussels to create his art. But what we see within the Tower of Babel is kind of some interesting ideas that I wanted to emphasize. Number one is the emphasis on realism, right? We see this indication of depth, right? The illusion of space within a work. But also what we see is kind of an interesting emphasis of humanity, right? Very different, as we see within the North, different ideas that are being influenced than what we see in Italy, right? Where we see in Italy, it's about our free will, our aspirations to reach towards the divine reaching back. What we see is the emphasis of the Tower of Babel is this is humanity's efforts to reach towards the heaven in a similar way. But we do it without the help of God. And as a result of this, we're punished by confounding languages, and he destroys the tower, right? And so generally, very similar to what we see with Erasmus, what tends to direct human nature is our folly, right? And so what the North is arguing is that we need to caution against that. We need to realize that that's part of the human condition. And if we can recognize that and be cautious of that, we then can become better, right? It's about us. It's not necessarily about the church or about what we're paying for or what we're wearing or who we are. It's about us, our individual essence. And we see that, again, that idea here with the blind leading the blind. Here we see something that's not necessarily overt. I mean, we wouldn't necessarily, without knowing the title, we might not know that this is actually a religious message to it, right? So similar to what we see here, even though this is representing the Tower of Babel, is representing a biblical moment, right? There's nothing overt that would suggest that they're adoring saints or anything like that. That they're more of a secular kind of feel to them. And you wouldn't, if you didn't really know the story of blind leading the blind, you probably wouldn't know that this was kind of a scriptural message to it. But here we see, the blind leading blind. Generally, what they would do is they would have the school of the blind as they travel from town to town, they'd have one person with a stick, kind of being held by the person in front, and then all of a sudden, someone that could see would then be holding the stick in the front and then leading the entire group down the street to the location. However, if the person at the front is blind, right, that's going to be a problem, and they're all going to fall into the pit. At least that's the scripture, right? The blind leading the blind, they all fall into the pit. And so even though there's no, overt religious ideas here, it still has that religious message, and it still focuses on this idea of folly, that we need to guard ourselves against the natural inclinations of the human condition to move away from God, as we see with the Gaunt altarpiece, right? That idea that we've separated ourselves from God. Now we need to be cautious so that we can work our way back to Him. But that's up to us, right? That's up to us and our faith. It's up to us and our ability to have that spiritual connection. And I wanted to leave off with this one. This is a winter landscape. This one reminds me of Rexburg, so it's kind of a fun one to kind of think about. But what we see within this one is that this is just kind of a secular painting of a town, right, during the winter. And what people generally do in town during the winter, they're just out on the frozen river, kind of enjoying their time, playing games and skating and enjoying life. But what we see within this, even though this is just a day-to-day event, this is still a symbolically religious work of art. And that's what we see is that transition, right? So the Northern Renaissance focuses on, very overt religious Catholic images at first, and then they start to transition towards less overt, more secular images towards, the later part of the Renaissance as a result of the Reformation and other ideas of mysticism and Northern humanism that are influencing their thought process. But again, the idea here is that we need to caution, even on a day-to-day basis. We can't just worry about going to church once a week and think that we're going to be okay, right? We need to think about transcending that secular day-to-day event to focus on becoming better. And that we see that time and time again within the Northern Renaissance art, and even art later, as we take a look at with the Baroque art. And as we come back to take a look at art, we're going to take a look at the Baroque era, which starts around 1600s or so. And we're going to see these ideas. They're going to look a little bit different, but they're going to focus more on secular images and how spirituality should be within that secular realm, that we can find spirituality within our day-to-day events.